Hello everyone, my name is Victoria Vidourek and I am currently a master's student at the University of Cincinnati. Today I will be talking about an ongoing project at UC that focuses on technical violations while on probation. People with serious mental illness are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. For example, as you can see here, the rates of serious mental illness in the criminal justice system is 2 times higher for women and 3 times higher for men compared to the general population. This finding has led many researchers to start investigating why this is the case. Several rigorous studies have established and replicated such findings. First, when all else is held equal, people with mental illness are no more likely to be criminal or violent than people without mental illness. Secondly, clinical factors like diagnosis, symptoms, psychiatric medication, and treatment do not predict criminal recidivism. Don Andrews and Jim Bonta have shown this in 2 different meta-analyses over the last 2 decades, and it would appear from studies by Jillian Peterson and colleagues, and separately John Junginger, that mental health symptoms rarely play a role in the commission of a crime. That is, they are a risk factor for crime in only about 10% of cases. Finally, Peterson also has shown that among people for whom mental health symptoms have influenced criminal involvement, most of their criminality has not been influenced by symptoms of mental health. So, researchers have kept searching for an explanation about the overrepresentation of people with mental illness in the criminal justice system. This has led to emerging of the science from mental health experts and people who study offender rehabilitation more generally. Several studies by people like Jennifer Scheme and Robert Morgan have shown that people with mental illness have the same risk factors for crime as people without mental illness, and in some cases, more of these or more severe manifestations of them. Okay, so now we know that people with mental illnesses share the same general risk factors for crimes as those without, and we also know from the meta-analysis that I mentioned earlier that these risk factors predict recidivism among people with mental illness. But we also have learned that people with mental illness, though not more at risk for crime or violence, all else equal, are at an increased risk for failure of community supervision. This figure is from a study by Jennifer Eno Loudon and colleagues, but has since been replicated in other samples, both for probation and parole. So the question is, do general risk factors for crime predict technical violations too? And do they do so as well for people with and without mental illness, like they do for the prediction of crime? So, I want to take a minute to talk about technical violations. These are not the same as committing crimes. Technical violations are received on probation or parole when someone is not doing what they are supposed to do, like drinking, talking with people who also have a criminal record, missing appointments, not paying fines and fees, and much more. They are not crimes per se, but they can be treated with sanctions and even sometimes revocation of supervision. They are passive responses or behavior of omission. Surprisingly, little is known about the risk factors for technical violations. Even more, we don't know how this differs for people with and without mental illness. Sure, it could be the case that general risk factors for crime play a role here too, like they do for criminal conduct. It could also be that personal factors, sometimes called responsivity factors in the literature, could play a role. Think about it. If someone is experiencing symptoms, has transportation issues, or anything like that, it might get in the way of them complying with the conditions of their supervision. This research project has 2 primary aims. Aim 1 is to determine what factors predict technical violations. Aim 2 is to determine how people with and without mental illness differ on these factors. Aim 1 is part of a larger scale ongoing project. Aim 2 is what we will be focusing on for this presentation. To date, we have conducted in-depth, semi-structured interviews with 74 people on probation across 2 different jurisdictions in 2 different states. We are aiming to have a total of 300 participants split evenly on mental health status. Several questions were asked in the study to determine mental health status. We assessed risk using the ORAS, which is a validated risk assessment tool that has been locally validated and adopted by these jurisdictions. However, our research team is also trained to reliably score the ORAS based on our interview. It yields a score for each of 7 criminogenic domains, which you will see shortly. We also assessed a number of personal or responsivity factors, the full list of which you will also see shortly. Finally, we asked participants to report whether or not they had committed any of 16 different types of common violations of supervision. Then, we computed a variety of scores that reflect how many of the different types of violations they endorsed committing. As you can see from our current sample, the mean age is 34, 70% is male, 51% is non-white, 81% has no Hispanic ethnicity, and 46% is single. We used chi-square analysis and independent sample t-tests to compare people with and without mental illness, and there were no statistically significant differences. So first, we compared people with and without mental illness on general risk factors for crime using t-test. All 7 criminogenic domains of the ORAS are listed above across the x-axis. We did not find any statistically significant differences between the 2 groups on any criminogenic domain. Next, using chi-square analysis, we compared the 2 groups on the presence or absence of a number of personal, non-criminogenic factors that are listed in the far left column. Although only one showed trend level significance, religion, we did see a greater proportion of people with mental illness who identified with a particular religion and culture, experienced discrimination, had concerns for their safety, had experiences of trauma, and were victims of abuse. In contrast, a smaller proportion of people with mental illness had children, childcare issues, transportation concerns, and other dependent concerns as compared to people without mental illness. We had a number of responsivity factors that we examined that were measured using a continuous ordinal scale. For these, we used t-tests to compare the groups and found that safety perceptions of their neighborhood was not significant, yet the mental health group felt more safe. For finances, again, not significant, the mental health group identified as being poor. For physical health, again, not significant, the mental health group identified as being poor in physical health. For self-esteem, not significant, the mental health group identified as being poor. And in responsibleness, not significant, the mental health group felt less. There was only one trend level for safety in the home, where mental health group felt more safe in their own home. Next, we wanted to compare the groups on whether or not they had different types of violations. The groups did not differ significantly from one another on the proportion of participants endorsing any of the violations listed. Really, the groups look very similar in terms of risk, responsivity, and violations. So the next big question is to what extent these criminogenic and responsivity factors are related to violation variety. So, we computed correlations between general risk and responsivity factors with the variety index separately for each group. Above, you will see the factors that were flagged as significant. As mentioned earlier, this is only a small sample of a larger scale, ongoing project. Yet, we can already see some trends in how groups differ in responsivity. We may have too small of a sample to detect differences between the groups on the risk factors and outcomes, but there are some trends observed. Importantly, different types of risk factors are associated with violation diversity for the 2 groups. For people with mental illness, it's responsivity only. For people without mental illness, it's both responsivity and general risk. It will be insightful to see if and how these results hold. For future directions, we will have more systematic coding of violations to see what influences the violations. Again, then we will have our full sample of 300 participants, so we will have the greater power to detect and affect. And we will be able to match participants on demographic characteristics to isolate the effects of general risk and responsivity. Thank you for your time.